But the key word here is manipulation. Pluto manipulated Persephone into staying with him. And so these are the types of things that we see in Plutonian relationships that take course over a long time, is people begin to manipulate out of fear. Fear of abandonment, oftentimes, right? He was afraid that Persephone was going to abandon the underworld. Right now, Mars is square Pluto, and Mars will be square Pluto over the next few days. And it's really interesting to me because Mars is violence, aggression, conflicts and all that sort of thing, passion and drive. And Pluto's control, right? Pluto's control, will, power, domination, death, right? The depths of the underworld. We see Pluto related to trauma, don't we? We see Pluto related to dominance and domineering type personalities. So what I've noticed with this transit, it's like, I think of it as pressure building up. Pressure just building and building and building and then erupting. The word I think of here is eruptions. You see, Mars just gets pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed by Pluto, right? This dominant power that just keeps shoving Mars into a corner. And then Mars finally says, like, fuck it, right? And lashes out, gets quite upset, and erupts. So I'm just concerned about what we're going to see this time. In current events, number one, and in the news and all that sort of stuff, but in our own particular lives. So as we get into your charts, we'll talk about what that looks like for you, okay? By seeing what houses are involved and what houses Mars rules in your chart for each rising sign. So that'll be quite important. Now, in terms of past events, which I think is quite interesting, right? Well, what's happened so far? Just over the past few days, we just had a big rescue operation happen in Gaza, right? From Israel. Hi, Ms. Colston, how are you? Right? Israel conducted a very large extraction operation in Gaza to rescue 4 hostages. And it cost, according to the Washington Post as of today, 274 lives. So 274 Palestinians were killed to rescue 4 people. And of course, we're so happy that 4 people were rescued. And of course, they shouldn't have been taken hostage at all in the first place. But how disproportionate. That's a massacre, and no one in the news is really mentioning those big numbers. So much as they're talking about the jubilation from the extraction of the hostages, which we all support. But this is extremely disgusting. And the pictures that I saw, some of them were just extremely disgusting and graphic. And it's interesting to note this point in time because the last time Mars was square Pluto was when? October 7th, 2023, when the Hamas attack on Israel took place, right? And for those of us who don't remember, and I sure believe you do, and I hope you do, that Hamas attacked Israel, killing around 12 to 1,300 civilians, if I'm not mistaken, or 12 to 1,300 people total, I suppose. At least those were the numbers I was aware of. Don't quote me on that necessarily. But so it was very interesting to see this morning, number one, that all this had just happened. And number two, to reflect on the fact that last time we had this transit was when this conflict sort of erupted. The eruption, right? Eruptions. We see this transit associated with violence, don't we? We see it associated with mass shootings. We see it associated with, terrorist attacks or whatever else. But usually it's where pressure has been building up. And if you think about the Israel-Gaza situation, you could think about it as a Mars-Pluto type thing. For those of you who don't know the history, it's been going on for 75 years or 76 years since 1948. And I'm not going to talk about the history. But imagine that pressure building up for so many years. And then we see these hard squares from Mars to Pluto, accompanying or correlating with these big eruptions. So let's keep our eyes peeled over the next few days and see what else we notice, if anything. We've already noticed a few things, right? There's already been mass shootings, right? Or rather, some shootings. I don't know if any mass ones happened yet. And then also big attacks, right? Big eruptions of violence. Yes? So just keep our eyes out. And then also speaking of Gaza, there was a giant protest in Washington, D.C. You see? Giant protest in Washington, D.C. over the past day or so. It was yesterday. I believe, pro-Palestinian protesters took over all of Pennsylvania Avenue around the White House. So this is some big momentous stuff. And yes, we'll look at your chart, and you asked, how long will this gnarly transit be with Mars? Well, let's look at the fun chart, shall we? This is today. We see Mars has just gone into Taurus, is at 3 minutes Taurus. And see, Mars is already forming that square to Pluto, right? And let's go forward a day. We're getting closer. And then, see, I always say it's around 5 degrees leading up and 5 degrees leading out. I would have said 27 degrees or so. So June 6th is when I would have started thinking of it as being especially relevant. June 5th, I guess. June 5th. Okay. And then, boom, here we are tomorrow. And it perfects on Tuesday, the 11th. And then 5 degrees out, so to like 6 degrees Taurus, I guess. So I would say until June 18th. We'll be seeing the effects of this until June 18th. So just be aware, that this is sort of the general backdrop that's going on below the surface. So just watch it, because this is a relatively brief transit, right? We're talking 10 days or so. Let's just call it 2 weeks in general, because we've had some of this leading up since the 5th. And we're going to have it leading out for another, 9 days or so. So we'll call it a 2-week window that more or less started on the 5th and goes till about the 18th. More or less, right? So this is power struggles in general, right? When we see Mars square Pluto, as we said earlier, eruptions. Now, eruptions don't just take place on the national scale or the international scale, of course, like we mentioned earlier, but eruptions also take place in our personal lives. So look at your own life and experience since at least October, early October, when the last one happened, and see what pressures have been weighing on you. Has anyone been trying to lord their power over you? Has anyone been trying to control you or your actions? Have you felt suppressed, demeaned, oppressed? Perhaps. Have you felt like people have been trying to manipulate you? Pluto is manipulation, you see. Pluto rules all the, those fun psychological abusive type conditions and relationships, things like gaslighting, making you feel crazy, trying to convince you that your experience or your feelings are incorrect or wrong, and coercion, right? Pluto doesn't always like consent. Remember the story of Pluto and Persephone, or rather Hades and Persephone? You could really say Pluto or Hades regardless, because at a certain point in Greek mythology, they became interchangeable, right? It's like Hades eventually became more the name of the place, and Pluto eventually became more the name of the person who ruled the place, yeah? And remember in the story of Hades and Persephone, Persephone gets kidnapped by Hades, but only after Zeus says it's okay. Zeus was her father, right? And Zeus says, oh yeah, Hades, it's great you like my daughter. Just go ahead and take her. You know, it's okay. I'm her dad. It's all good. Of course, her mom, Demeter, was not happy, right? So Demeter throws a fit on the surface, right? And everything starts to die, and she plunges the world into perpetual winter, right? No one's having sex. No one's making babies. Nothing is growing, right? So people are starving and dying, essentially, on the surface. And so Persephone, over time, grew to love Hades, right? And they ended up having one of the more healthy or constructive relationships of the whole Greek pantheon, if that's even a thing, because the whole Greek pantheon was made up of awful, awful people, or gods, right? Because gods were just modeled on the awfulness of people. So Zeus was a fucking racist all the time, you know? And yeah, Hades took Persephone against her will, which was the custom of the day. Doesn't make it right. I believe on Greek pottery that the symbolism for captivity was the same as the symbolism for marriage, right? Because that's all it was. Marriage was captivity for women, you see? But Persephone grows to love Hades, doesn't she? And what happens? She recognizes that mom is throwing a fit up on the surface, and she says, yo, dude, I love you. I love you, but you know what? My mom is like killing people up on the surface with perpetual winter. She's being a homicidal Elsa, right? Let it go, let it go. Gotta go back to the surface and stop perpetual winter. So Hades is like, yo, okay, I get it. I get it. And she says, yes, I'm coming back. I love you. I love you. It's all good. And Hades says, okay, I trust you, I believe you. Here's some pomegranate seeds to take with you. And for those of you who know the myth, remember the pomegranate seeds bound Persephone to the underworld, didn't they? Pluto didn't have to do that. He was super insecure. He was afraid she wasn't coming back, you see. And giving her the pomegranate seeds was manipulation. And you may recall the way the myth finishes, essentially, is that Persephone spends 6 months on the surface with her mom Demeter during the spring and summer months when things are growing and everything like that, and the birds and the bees are pollinating each other and people are fucking, right? I mean, for me, fucking should be like a 365-day affair, but you see what I'm saying. And then the other 6 months of the year she spent in the underworld with Hades, her love, right? Queen of the underworld she was, yes, Persephone. And those were the winter and fall months, you see, of course. So, but the key word here is manipulation. She manipulated, or sorry, Pluto manipulated Persephone into staying with him. And so these are the types of things that we see in Plutonian relationships that take course over a long time, is people begin to manipulate out of fear. Fear of abandonment, oftentimes, right? He was afraid that Persephone was going to abandon the underworld. So that's what we have to be careful of, that we let our fears start to take hold of us and our desires and our actions so that we start manipulating people, right? We have to learn to let things go. That's a big thing with Mars-Pluto transits, is we learn to let things go. One of the images I have in my head with the Mars-Pluto square, especially with synastry. In synastry, this is rough, right? But with the Mars-Pluto square, who else remembers Peter Pan, the Disney movie, Peter Pan? Remember when Captain Hook is like trying to escape the crocodile at the end? And the crocodile keeps, biting him and taking him under. And remember Captain Hook is like trying to squeeze out of the jaws. That's what Mars, square Pluto's like to me. Mars is like Captain Hook trying to squeeze out of those jaws. And he erupts, doesn't he? It's the eruption. So my advice for all of you is that we start to monitor or observe or be aware of our volatility, of our emotions in general, because we're going to feel like we're backed up into a corner during this time. It's just sort of the way it is. And that's where we see the eruptions. We see people or groups or whatever with feelings of weakness or feelings with oppression or an inability, right, to be listened to or acknowledged or whatever. When people get desperate, they do desperate things. And that's what I think of with Mars square Pluto. I think of the exasperation of desperation, which leads to explosion and eruption. Eruption. So in our own lives, this can take place in all sorts of little things, can it? Like waiting in line at the gas station or, at your food place or whatever. For service workers, this is rough. Because for service workers, you're often on the receiving end of things, right? You got the Karen in line barking at you and all that kind of shit. You see? So just be aware of that. Okay, we'll go on to the next chart in just a second. But I want to reiterate generally that this is a time when we really have to be cautious and aware of when we're starting to let pressure build up. It's a lot better to let off a little bit of steam more frequently than to allow pressure to build up and then explode on people who may not even deserve it, right? We often hurt the ones we love, don't we? Because we feel more comfortable around them. A sense of familiarity sort of allows us to be mean. To be mean to our friends, family, and loved ones. It takes two to tango in a relationship, or more if there's more people involved. But over time, we can allow ourselves to get manipulated or pushed or cajoled, and we get into this position where it's like, no, I'm not dealing with that anymore. I'm not taking it. We're not gonna take it. No, not gonna take it. Right? Dee Snider, Twisted Sister. And we do what? We explode. You would love to learn to surrender, submit, and let go. You don't totally do it. Like it doesn't just, it's not like it's done. It's a lifelong thing. We're always learning to let things go. Right? Like Paul McCartney said, live and let die. Right? We're living to let things die. We're living, we live, we progressively unfold to life as we let things go. We're not so much afraid of death, are we? As we are afraid of life. That is the key fear here. I've said that in other videos, But it's the fear of life that really holds us back, isn't it? How much don't we do that we wish we could because we are afraid? We're afraid of, the pain or the effort or what people will think of us, you see? Pluto takes us out of that fear by plunging us further into it, right? Remember the Pluto Persephone story? He was afraid to let go. He was afraid to let Persephone go so that she would freely come back to him. This is the choice during this transit for us, you and me, to freely let ourselves go. Bit by bit, it's a progressive effort. It doesn't just happen overnight. So that we progressively emerge into a greater and fuller, more authentic condition of ourselves. So that we learn to take the courage to do what we wish we could do, to do what we want to do what's fulfilling to us. Because you could die at any fucking moment, and that's what Pluto shows us. You could die at any fucking minute. There are techniques in astrology to try and gauge the length of life, but you don't really know, do you? So Pluto crossing the ascendant is admonishing us to take now. You only have right fucking now. That's all you have. So use right now, right? Do it now. I don't mean be stupid, Don't make uncalculated risks. But have a little bit more courage and a little bit more inner fire to do the things that you wish you could do and that you know you should do. I identify with Persephone too, ironically. Well, the Persephone story was itself sort of derivative of the story of Inanna, my mama Inanna, who was the prototypical Venus from ancient Sumer, you see, and ancient Mesopotamia in general, Sumer and Akkad. But I still haven't let go and lived. Yes, exactly. Yeah, but this is always a progressive thing in life. We have to be reminded all the time, like let go. We all grasp onto things, me especially. And I just want to make sure that we go back over in general, the fact that Pluto is square Mars right now. And as we said, Pluto square Mars, the key word for me is eruptions, right? We talked about the Hades and Persephone myth. We talked about the symbolism, right, of Pluto pushing and pushing and pushing, manipulating, right? Trying to control. Sometimes, you know, through manipulation or through underhanded means. It's not always overt, like, do this. Sometimes it's very underhanded, sometimes it's very passive aggressive, and sometimes it's very subliminal, right? So we have to make things clear. We have to make things very clear to ourselves during these sorts of transits so that we're not just exploding willy-nilly. We have to be aware of why we've been pushed into a corner, why we're feeling this way, because otherwise we're going to spread our angst and our anger indiscriminately onto people who don't deserve it. And we could ruin our own relationships. We could cause ourselves lots of unnecessary pain through being impulsive and reactionary and reactive rather than proactive, right? Or conscious and responsive. So the key word here, or the key phrase and the key idea is to take a step back, to think before you act, to recognize pressure building up in yourself before you have the explosion. Mars is like a tea kettle. Yeah? Or think of it like a Coke can or a soda can of some sort, right? And you leave it in heat. And the heat just keeps accumulating, right? And the pressure keeps building up on the inside, right? Like liquid hot magma, building up under the surface. It needs pressure release, you see? We need to let off steam from the kettle. Otherwise, it boils over and creates a much bigger mess that we didn't want to deal with. So please be aware. And sometimes action and even righteous anger or conflict is due, right? Sometimes you have to have it. But don't let it have you, right? Don't let it have you. Don't let it tell you what to do. The distinction here is between conscious and unconscious action, between conscious recognition and allowing ourselves to be unconsciously moved and used and shaken about like a plastic bag in the wind, you see? Don't let life grab you by the and push you around, tell you what to do. You want to make your own conscious choices that work for you, that come from your awareness of how you're developing as a person, and who you want to be, and what you want to do, and how you want to relate to others, you see. Thank you for watching. Like this video and subscribe to my channel. Please also consider tipping me. You can give through Super Thanks below or use my PayPal link in the description. It helps me keep making such wonderful content. And remember, I do the best readings. It's science. You can book through my website, saturngirl.org, or contact me directly. All my info is below in the description. And remember, I love you. You're beautiful. And have a wonderful whatever it is you're having.